What is going on, guys? We are back with part 2 of this build. If you haven't seen part 1, please go back and watch that and get all caught up so you can see what is going on. From part 1, we pulled all of the moss out of the failed wall and secured hardscape. This was really simple. Just wedge it into place and lock it in with some expanding foam. Here you can see I'm filling the moss wall back up, but this time I'm going to do a more thorough job in order to make sure that the drips are all getting absorbed and that moss is becoming nice and saturated. Right here we are using live sphagnum moss. This is very readily available in my area and I just gathered it sustainably and put it to use. You can see by the time you finished, it creates a really cool look, tying everything in super duper nice. As you can see, I left the top section open, and this is because we're going to change out the way that we're doing our drip system. This initial drip system, if you watch part 1, you would know that it did not work out as planned. The drips were far too concentrated, and rather than saturating the moss, it just let way too much water through, flooding the system and not actually absorbing as we wanted. So we switched that out with a different type of hose. This is a small gauge weeping hose. Weeping hose is a permeable rubber hose that allows water to penetrate through the surface, slowly leaking out and dripping. So combining this with an inline flow valve that I can adjust, we should be able to get the desired effect. And as you can see here, a nice slow steady drip, and rather than it being concentrated spots, it is nice and spread out. With that all sorted, we go back in with the moss and we start filling the gaps. Here I am making sure to get moss in behind the hose itself because I don't want water just running down the back wall. I need it to drip down into the moss and saturate it for the epiphytic plants to actively shoot roots into the moist surface. The whole point of this is that the moss is going to be a growing medium for the plants. So fingers crossed, this works how we want. Keep in mind that most of the things that I'm doing in this build, and a lot of my builds in general, are largely experimental. Not to a point that it's detrimental for the animal, but I really enjoy pushing the limits and seeing what can be done that I haven't seen done before. Testing the dripping system for a second time, we are seeing exactly what we want. That water's pushing forward and dripping down the moss surface. Now my misting system and the drip system as well are run on smart tap timers. They run straight off of my outside tap in through a gap that I've made in the window and are controlled via a Wi-Fi app control. I used the Holman watering system, and I decided to put the drip system and the misting system on separate circuits so I could control them individually. The purpose behind this is so I can control the misting and the drip system individually, allowing me to have the drip system come on every single day for a short period of time, keeping that moss nice and moist and the plants growing well, whilst using the misting system itself more for a hydration purpose within the setups. So with that sorted, we go back and we look at some drainage options. Now, ideally I would have liked to be able to drill in a drain to this, but because it is stacked on top of another enclosure, that wasn't possible. So I put this placeholder cardboard tube in and started applying the drainage layer. For the drainage layer, we're just going with a square lava rock. This is a very cheap option. And then we cover it all up with a geotextile fabric. Moss walls, drainage and substrate in place, we are now up to planting. As you can see, we're stuck to a lot of creeping and climbing species, ferns down the bottom, as well as some key feature larger species of philodendron that really look right at home in this sort of a setup. Leaf litter on the ground, and it all ties in nicely, creating a beautiful little slice of jungle. The misting system created the exact effect that I wanted, with droplets gathering on the plants, allowing for my animals to drink from the surfaces. Here we are taking a moss pole that I have then heated and manipulated to create a different shape. And we're then going to take the same sphagnum moss used in the moss wall, and we're going to attach it with some tie wire. This process was easy enough to do. Just start by securing one end of the wire into the moss pole, hold the moss in place, and then start winding. Apply more moss and keep winding. This process is very messy and quite tedious, but the end result is very rewarding. Here you can see how tight I'm pulling the wire. This not only makes it disappear into the moss, but ensures that no animals can get tangled. Once wedged in place, the moss perches are trimmed to create the desired shape and effect. The idea behind these was to create this type of branch that you see in heavily canopied areas. So if we keep trimming and clearing the moss as we go. Up next we go to the canopy planter. Now I decided to cut a hole in the mesh itself that is there to hold the moss in place, and then from there we are going to plant directly through that hole so it hangs out through the side and down. What I'm trying to achieve here is to create the illusion of leaves and branches hanging down from the canopy high above. Initially, we went with the creeping fig. I thought that this plant would do quite well and would spread very quickly, taking over the top portion of the vivarium. Once fixed in place, I simply spread out the leaves a little bit and then cover the remaining mesh with moss. For the final part of the drainage, I took a piece of PVC pipe and drilled some holes in the end, dropping it down through the cardboard placeholder, making sure it was all the way to the bottom. I then wheeled the cardboard placeholder out of the way until it let go and I could pull it free. Something interesting I'd noticed was that the isopods and springtails were feeding on the decomposing cardboard, which I suppose makes sense because it is an organic material. But it does also make me wonder if that could be used as a layer within the substrate that would break down and feed the cleanup crew. Pushing the substrate and the moss in to create a tight fit for the pipe was quite simple. I then took some coarse foam and pushed it down to make sure that no animals could get inside the pipe. All I did from there was cover it up with some more moss and blend it in seamlessly with the substrate. After about a month of everything growing in nicely, I decided to add some more plants to the moss walls. So all we need to do here is go in, pull out a chunk of moss and replace it with the desired plants. This little fern is a rabbitfoot fern, and these are an epiphytic species that grow quite well in baskets, so I'm hoping it'll do well in the moss wall. Next up, in a more shaded location, we go in with a bird's nest fern. Now these species do get very large, but I'm hoping that it'll be slow growing enough that if it does outgrow the system, that I can just replace it with a more juvenile plant and continue the cycle. These plants are quite often found growing in nooks in trees and attached to branches, so they should do well on the moss wall. This one here is a species of peperomia. Gives a really nice jungle sort of a vibe and has cool texture to the leaves. One of the advantages that I found to using this plastic mesh as a substrate holder is that I have the ability to go in and find the best spots to put the plants. All I need to do is feel around in the moss for the most ideal locations. Here we're putting another small bird's nest fern at the base of the log, which should eventually grow and hang down, filling in that space and creating a hide. It's been approximately 2 to 3 weeks since planting and the plants are all doing well. The moss has done its job and everything is growing beautifully. One of the plants that unfortunately did not do well at all was the creeping fig. From what I can work out from this plant, if you do not keep the roots moist at all times, it will die. I have a very love-hate relationship with this plant, but I haven't had the best luck. So what we're going to do here is we're going to remove it and try and not get dirt all over the shop. And then, sure enough, the inside of the moss is bone dry. So that's the issue. From here, I decided that the best thing to do was remove all of the moss and replace the hose with another section of weeping hose to try and create more saturation. On top of that, I created a mix of sphagnum moss, peat moss, and clay in order to create something more of a substrate layer that could hold on to moisture at a more efficient level. Once everything was back in place, I opted for a hardier species. This is the bridal veil and can seem to handle drier conditions. The end result is looking really good, but I was worried that the bottom plants weren't getting enough light, so I installed a small spotlight. And then disaster struck. Well, do you remember when I did that video of why to not do bioactive? One of the reasons was things are bound to fail. Unfortunately, this enclosure here, which was so close to being done, growing in nicely, looking exactly how I had envisioned, well, I came home from work today And we've got a pretty big problem. All around the bottom is wet. It has dripped down onto this one, which has caused more water damage and flooded the room. And when I say flooded, this was in one of the drip points, and that's just a little bit of what had come out. So the plants are loving it. That's called making the best of a bad situation. But yes, all of the waterproofing that I did on this clearly failed, and from what I can make out after checking the misting system, the water in the drainage layer managed to break through about so the way that I waterproofed this was about 4 layers of tile pointing. Then I soaked it in a membrane sealant to get into any little gaps and cracks. And then I siliconed all of the joins. And apparently that was still not enough. Now I can only assume that it's because I was using inferior secondhand board and not primary use stuff, but very, very disappointing, and all of this is now kaput. Very, very disappointed. Not to mention that this one here, now I'm not going to lie, there's been a few things going on with this enclosure that I wasn't super happy with. These aren't tiny enclosures by any means, but the misting systems in an enclosure this small doesn't work very well. The drip system works really, really well. But yeah, I don't know exactly what's happened. But nothing good, apparently. I've tested the misting because I thought initially that maybe a pipe had let go. Not that. Both of the misting nozzles in this one hadn't been misdirected because I thought maybe that's what had happened. But no, the only thing that I can think is that the sealant on this has failed and there must have been a ton of water in the drainage layer, which I had been checking periodically, but I guess not enough. Truth is, disappointing doesn't even come close. But if you want to see how we recover from this and move on, make sure to subscribe and follow along on the journey. I'll see you on the next one.